The lock clicked. A laugh slipped through the motel door like steam under a lid. Her laugh, then a man's voice, low and sure, cutting me out of the world I thought I owned. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Daniel. I'm 54 years old, and this is what really happened. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and old cigarettes. The carpet had that sticky give you only notice when you're trying not to be noticed. Room 20 warranty hummed with the air unit. I stood half in shadow under the burnt-out light between 212 and 216, holding a paper cup of motel coffee I didn't drink. It cooled in my hand until it felt like a bruise. Her phone lit up my screen. Running late. The text read. A second bubble followed. Client emergency. The dots danced like a joke that wasn't funny. Through the thin door I heard ice tumble into a bucket. That clatter like loose change. Then they went quiet. The kind of quiet that makes time loud. I didn't knock. Not that night. I learned a long time ago that yelling only warms the air. I swallowed the coffee's bitterness, turned and walked. Outside, January had a clean metallic cold. My breath came out in small ghosts. The neon vacancy sign buzzed over my shoulder like a fly that didn't know it was winter. On the drive home, wipers dragged across a dry windshield. My hands were steady on the wheel. The heater smelled like dust and fabric softener from the rag I'd stuffed in the vent when it rattled. In the passenger seat, the paper bag with drywall screws I'd picked up earlier tipped and spilled. Little silver eyes rolling into the footwell. Life always makes noise when you want silence. At a red light, my phone buzzed again. "Love you," she wrote. I stared at the 3 words. We'd been married 26 years. We had learned how to fill a room with routine. A house with schedules. A calendar with color-coded birthdays and car service reminders. Some endings don't come with thunder. They arrive like the mail. Stamped, sorted, dropped, through the slot. I took a right instead of a left and drove past our street. I didn't want to see the porch light or the wreath she'd left up too long because it still smells like pine. I rolled into the grocery store lot and parked under a light that painted the hood of my truck a cold white. I opened notes on my phone. New entry. Title 20. I wrote dates, times, what I heard, what I didn't say. I wrote the motel's name, the color of the door, faded blue with a scratch near the handle like someone once twisted a key too hard. I wrote the shape of the lie, not to keep from forgetting, to make it real enough to hold. I'm a forensic accountant. Or if you ask my wife at a dinner party, Daniel deals with numbers and makes sure no one steals. I trace things for a living. Not just money, but patterns. People leave trails. Some try to sweep behind them. Most don't realize the broom is leaving its own marks. I went home after midnight. The house greeted me the way a faithful dog does. Same hallway, same family photos, same hum of the refrigerator like a steady breath. I took off my boots in the mudroom and set them side by side like 2 men pretending they still get along. The kitchen smelled faintly of rosemary and dish soap. On the table, a folded napkin with a grocery list in her handwriting: milk, tulips, coffee filters, birthday card for Dad. In our bedroom, her side of the bed was neat. The top of her dresser was tidy. Perfume bottle. A small tray with 3 rings. A hair tie. The pink light on her charger winked like a secret. She'd fallen asleep on the couch, she would say in the morning. The throw blanket would be neatly draped. The TV's watch history would show the same talk show she never watches. Lies need sets. She was getting good at building them. I showered. The water hit my shoulders like rain on old asphalt. I leaned my head against the tile and stared at the drain until the fog on the glass door made the world disappear. I didn't cry. I didn't talk to myself. I counted, the way I do when I reconcile an account that someone else swears is close enough. When I couldn't feel the heat anymore, I turned the water off. The mirror over the sink was a smeared moon. I wiped a circle clean with my palm and looked at a face I recognized but didn't trust. The worst part wasn't the cheating, I said to that man. It's how easily the truth fits in her mouth. My voice sounded like it was trying out a new room. I slept on top of the covers in a sweatshirt and socks and woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of the kettle clicking back to off. She was at the counter in a robe, hair up, bare feet flat on the tile. She smiled the way you smile at someone who is going to make your day harder or easier depending on what they do next. Crazy night, she said. Client had a flood in their office. We were bailing water till midnight. Where? I asked. Midtown, she said, pinching a croissant in half. Flakes fell like shy confetti. Why? I nodded. bit into toast that tasted like cardboard. No reason. We moved around each other like old dancers who don't look down anymore. I kissed her cheek. She smelled like hotel soap, pretending to be grapefruit. My chest felt like a drawer you can't quite close. At work, the office was cold enough that the tips of my fingers felt slow. I like that. It keeps me awake. I logged into our case management system and pretended to care about an invoice discrepancy between a landscaping company and a city parks department. But my eyes weren't reading numbers. They were looking for fingerprints. At lunch, I didn't eat. I drove to the motel. I asked for a receipt. The clerk pushed back. I smiled the slow smile people use when they are about to offer a detail you can verify. You have cameras, I said. I'm not asking for footage. I'm asking if a blonde woman in a navy coat came in last night, paid cash, and walked to 214. He shifted in his stool. People who work behind small counters learn to read faces. I didn't give him a threat. I gave him paperwork. I set a business card on the counter. Not my office one. The plain one I use when I do volunteer work with the Neighborhood Business Association. It has a phone number that rings to me and a title that sounds official without meaning anything. Treasurer. He flicked his eyes down, then up. We don't give out guest information, he said, which wasn't the same as no. Good policy, I said. I left the card. I left a tip jar, 20. I left without looking back. Some doors open when you show you know where the hinges are. At home that night she was soft and tired and watched me the way people watch a dog that might bolt. She poured me wine. I said I had a headache. She touched my arm. I didn't pull away. I love you, she said. Practice had made her voice smooth. I know, I said, and swallowed. I waited for her to sleep. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a yellow legal pad. I opened our phone bill, itemized records, familiar numbers, unfamiliar ones. One number appeared like a drumbeat. Late night, early morning, lunch hour. I wrote it down and circled it. Then I opened a new tab. Search, number to name. The site spit out a tease. Paywall. I'm not above $10 for truth. The name was clean and handsome. Ryan Mercer. Local, 40, mortgage lender. I clicked through to LinkedIn. His photo was the kind of confident that practices in mirrors. Regional director, Northway Lending. NMLS ID listed like a badge. I wrote the number down. I know what numbers can do. Numbers open doors. Numbers end careers. I clicked again. State Licensing Board. Public lookup. There he was. A line of small print history. 3 states licensed. 1 consent order 5 years ago in a place people move to and move out of without changing their driver's license for too long. Failure to properly disclose a conflict of interest. Fine paid. License retained. A lessons retained. A lesson learned or a cost accepted. I felt something shift in me that wasn't anger. It was colder than that. Cleaner. I printed the page and the printer stuttered like it hadn't been asked to do much lately. I clipped the paper to the legal pad with a binder clip and wrote, in small letters at the top, Mercer. I opened another tab. Reviews. Yelp. Google. Ryan made it easy. Ryan found us a better rate. Ryan is a shark, but in a good way. I wrote the names of the reviewers. I wrote the names of the realtors who answered him like pals in the comments. People like to be seen. People like to be thanked. Their trails crisscross like fishing line you only notice when it catches your wrist. She stirred in the bedroom. I froze. Listened. Air out. Air in. Silence again. I kept going. Our house had refinanced last spring. Rates were wobbling. We'd considered cash out to fix the roof and finish the basement for her studio. She'd pushed for it. The market is changing, she said like she was reading off a screen. We had met at a small bank where the loan officer wore a tie in a color too brave for his suit. He was polite but tired. The paperwork was heavy. The numbers didn't sing. We backed out before appraisal. I opened my documents folder and searched Rafi. The application packet opened with that dead white PDF look. I scrolled. Signatures. Initials, disclosures. At the bottom of page 6 there was a signature that wasn't mine. My name written in a way my hand never moves. Slant wrong. Loop wrong. It felt like seeing a photograph where your face is smiling at something you don't remember. I looked at the broker's name on the cover sheet. Northway Lending. Contact Ryan Mercer. I pushed back from the table and felt the chair legs drag on the tile. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like a machine dialing down. I scrolled again. There. In a neat line. Rate not locked. Subject to change prior to closing. I remembered that conversation. How she had shrugged and said, "We can wait a week." How the week turned into 2. How the rate crept up like tide around a rock. How she called someone on the porch in the evening and came back in with eyes bright and sorry. I clicked through emails. There it was. A message thread between her and a Gmail that used his initials and a year of birth. They hadn't been sloppy. They'd been lazy. "Come by at lunch. We can talk in my car. Don't worry, I'll handle him." My hands shook, but not with rage, with recognition. This wasn't a story about love. It was a story about leverage. I am not naive. Marriage is a house built on a slope. You're always propping, shoring, fixing nail pops. But this was different. This was somebody stepping onto my property and pulling with quiet hands at the joists. I printed the email thread. I slid it under the legal pad. I took a manila folder from the drawer and wrote, with a thick pen, "Winter." I wrote it slowly. The way I teach myself I mean it. The next morning I talked less. She talked more. People fill silence with explanations no one asked for. At work I had a check-in with my boss. He asked if I wanted to take the hospital audit. I passed. I wanted smaller things. Tighter circles. I wanted to hold something in my hands and know what it weighed. At noon I sat in my truck behind Northway Lending. Their building was one of those new ones, flat roof, black metal trim, a rectangle pretending to be interesting. I watched men in fitted jackets carry coffees. I watched women with leather bags walk like they knew exactly how far their heels could take them. I watched a man with a haircut that cost a conversation hold the door open for a client. He was taller than me. Younger. Smile that reached all the way to the part of his eyes that calculated. He talked with his hands. He stood a little too close to people. He laughed at things that didn't have jokes. When he turned, the light hit the little silver tie clip like a wing. I didn't approach. I'm not the dramatic type. I'm the patient type. I wrote down his license plate. I wrote down the county. I wrote down the old ding on the rear bumper that a less proud man would have had fixed. That evening my neighbor Tom waved me over the fence. He had a beer and a problem with his property taxes. He said the county had reclassified his shed as a structure, and his assessment went up. I told him I'd look. He thanked me like I'd offered to carry a couch. We stood there in the cold, breath white, listening to a dog bark 4 houses down. "You look tired, Dan," Tom said. "I am," I said, "but I'm awake." I went inside. She was on the couch. Blanket. Movie she didn't watch. I kissed her head and she smiled without pause. In the kitchen I opened the laptop and wrote a list. Pull credit report to confirm any inquiries from Northway. State Licensing Board complaint process. Required documentation. TFPB. Mortgage servicing complaints. Timeline. HR search. Does his company have a code of conduct with a no fraternization with clients clause? Public records. Any judgments, lanes, prior consent orders. Social track his patterns. Where he eats, who he thanks. 2 memorable lines wrote themselves in my head like they wanted paper. I didn't have a meltdown, I built a timeline. I didn't chase them. I audited them. I still can't decide if walking away from that motel door was strength or cowardice. The question sat with me like a guest who doesn't take off their coat. But the not knocking bought me something I needed more than pride: time. Time to turn hurt into work. The next day, the motel clerk called the number on my card. He sounded like a man who had decided honesty would be cheaper than trouble. "She paid cash," he said. "He paid the first time. She paid the second. You didn't hear that from me." I thanked him and asked for nothing else. People talk more when they don't feel pulled. At lunch I drove to the county recorder's office. I know those rooms better than most people know their own basements. Fluorescent lights. Plastic pencils on strings. A low cough from someone who should be home. I pulled property records on Ryan Mercer. He didn't own the house he lived in. His wife did. Title in her name. Purchased 3 years ago. Cash down that raised my eyebrows. His truck was leased through his company. He kept himself light. Good move for a man who wanted to be hard to catch. I pulled corporate filings. Northway Lending had a clean front. The owners sat 2 layers up, an LLC above an LLC. I read the registered agent's name and smiled a little. We had seen each other across tables where pens click and signatures mean the end of a long story. On my way out I stopped in at the coffee shop near the office, the one with the floor that's always a little sticky. He was there. She was there. They didn't touch. They didn't sit. They stood at the end of the counter near the napkins, and he spoke in a voice you use when you want the other person to think you're solving a problem they caused. She looked at him like a student looks at a teacher, who assigns extra credit with a smile. I turned my back to them and watched their reflection in the pastry case glass. I could see her mouth form my name and then close around a different word. He nodded. His hand hovered near her elbow but didn't land. When they left, they exited in different directions like a magic trick with no magic. That night, I opened a fresh folder on my laptop. I named it Maintenance, which is what I used to name tax receipts before I got better at naming things what they are. Inside, I created subfolders: licensing, personal, company, evidence. I dropped files in like coins into a jar. Every click felt like a small door closing. The next morning, I called the state licensing board. I didn't file a complaint. I asked for forms. I asked what evidence was required. I asked what qualified as a client. I asked whether prospective counted. I asked if a broker handling a file where a spouse was a signatory created any duty of disclosure beyond the usual. I wrote the answers down, and when the woman on the line asked if there was anything else she could help me with, I said not yet, and meant it. I called the small bank where we had started our refinance. I asked for copies of any addenda signed after our initial application. The man on the phone sighed and told me I'd need to come in with identification. I said I would. I put on a tie I hadn't worn in months. The knot felt like work. I drove over. The lobby smelled like toner and coffee and that faint lemon every public place uses to say we're clean. The banker printed a packet and slid it across the desk. I can only give you what has your name, he said. I nodded. I flipped. There it was again. The wrong signature. My name written by someone who writes my name but doesn't know it. And there, buried in the middle, the broker of record change. Northway in. Small bank out. Initialed by her. Dated 10 months ago. Did you talk to the broker directly? I asked. No, he said, annoyed in the way professionals get when amateurs rewrite their day. We got an email. Said the client was going in a different direction. He nudged the paper. This happens all the time. Not like this, I thought. Not with that name. I thanked him. I slid the packet into winter. I walked outside and the air felt different, thinner, like the day had tilted. At home, she was making soup. The smell of garlic and onions softened the house. She asked about my day. I told her about Tom's shed. She laughed in the right place. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. We should talk. Warren. I stared at it until the letters blurred. She looked at me and did not ask who it was. That told me two things. He had gotten my number from somewhere he thought I'd accept, and she had finally understood that the ground was shifting under her bare feet. I put the phone down like it was hot. I washed my hands for longer than the soap required. The water ran and ran. When I turned it off, the house sounded too quiet, like after a power outage when everything hums back to life a little wrong. Later in my office, I wrote him back. About what? He responded quickly. Let's not make this messy. His confidence made me smile. Men like him believe mess is something other people make. I typed, come clean, in writing. Then I put the phone face down and let it vibrate on the desk like a caught fly. I didn't answer his next two messages. I printed them. I saved the threads as PDFs. I backed them up to a drive labeled taxes. I put the drive in a drawer under old warranties no one ever needs. When I closed the drawer, the wood made a soft sound like the end of a small book. I looked at the winter folder. I looked at the word I'd written there the night of the motel. I thought about the hallway smell, the coffee I didn't drink, the laugh that slid under the door. I thought about love as a ledger, debits, credits, adjusting entries no one wants to sign. Some people call it justice. I call it necessary. I poured a bourbon I didn't finish. I sat in the dark and listened to the dishwasher run. It sounded like rain behind a wall. I thought about the board's complaint file. I thought about the company's code of conduct I'd downloaded and highlighted. Employees shall avoid romantic relationships with clients or potential clients that could create a conflict of interest or the appearance of impropriety. The phrase appearance of impropriety has always felt like a loophole big enough to drive two lives through. Tonight it felt like a trapdoor with his name on it. The next morning I dressed early and drove to a notary. I signed a statement, plain language, dates, facts. No speculation, no adjectives where a noun would do. I had the notary stamp it, the way you press a seal into wax to say this happened, and I was awake for it. On my way back, I stopped at the small bank again. Different teller, different mood. I asked to see the copies of the driver's licenses on file for our refi attempt. She pulled the file, set it down. My license copy, front and back. Her license copy, her signature matching the one on the broker change, the loops and slant perfect as practice. I took my copy. I thanked her. I walked out into a sun that had decided to be kind for an hour. I know when a story turns. It doesn't announce itself with a cymbal crash. It just stops fighting gravity. I drove to a P.O. box store and rented a box. I gave it a number. I put the key on my ring next to the house key that felt heavier than it used to. I printed a stack of envelopes with the licensing board's address, with the company's HR, with the CFPB, with his wife's name, which I now knew from the deed. On the way home, I stopped at a light. He pulled up next to me in his leased truck, music low, sunglasses on despite the weak winter sun. He didn't look over. Of course he didn't. He didn't know yet who I was when I wasn't the man my wife had described to him in those parking lot conversations. He turned right on green. I went straight. I felt calm, controlled, quiet, powerful. The way steel is powerful when it pretends to be a bridge. When I got home, a certified letter was waiting in our mailbox. Northway Lending. Inside, a form letter offering a rate checkup and no-cost review. His name was at the bottom. The signature was a scan. The irony was a gift. I set the letter on the kitchen table. I took a photo of it next to our salt shaker and a bowl of apples. Evidence is stronger when it looks like a life. The front door opened. She came in with tulips wrapped in brown paper. She set them in the sink and looked at me and then at the letter and then at me again. "What's that?" she asked, voice careful. "Marketing," I said. From a man who loves a conflict of interest. Her lips parted. She reached for the letter. I moved it away. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I walked to my office and closed the door. On my desk, the winter folder was open. Inside, the notary stamped statement sat on top. I slipped the certified letter under it. Then the printed texts, then the wrong signature, then the code of conduct with the yellow highlights like caution tape wrapping a scene. My phone buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. Not his. A woman's. Simple. Direct. "I think my husband is cheating on me. Can we talk?" I read it twice. Then a follow-up. "My name is Emily Mercer." I put the phone down. The dishwasher clicked off in the kitchen like a clock striking. The house held its breath. So did. The message from Emily Mercer sat on my screen like a candle in a dark room. Small, but impossible to ignore. "I think my husband is cheating on me. Can we talk?" Her follow-up still glowed beneath it. "My name is Emily Mercer." The dishwasher had just stopped, leaving the kitchen in that hollow post-silence you get after white noise disappears. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I didn't answer right away. People who text in moments like this are either desperate or dangerous. Sometimes both. I picked up the phone and typed, "How did you get my number?" Then I set it face down again. It buzzed almost immediately. From the phone bill. We share one. I saw the number in his call history and searched it. I leaned back in my chair. The winter folder was still open in front of me. My fingers rested on the manila edges like I was afraid the papers inside might fly away. "Why now?" I typed. This time there was a pause, long enough for me to imagine her somewhere, maybe at her kitchen counter, maybe in her car, deciding how much truth to give a stranger whose life her husband had already helped shatter. "Finally, because I just saw your wife leaving our house." I stared at the words. The house wasn't far from here. I knew that from the property records. It was in the same county, tucked in one of those overland neighborhoods where every lawn looks mowed by the same invisible hand. "When?" I asked. 20 minutes ago. She replied. I didn't ask why my wife would risk going there instead of another motel or the anonymity of a coffee shop. People get sloppy when they think the game is still in their hands. Emily sent another message before I could answer. "We need to meet, somewhere public." I agreed to a diner halfway between our homes. It was the kind of place where the tables are always a little sticky, the air smells faintly of fry oil, and the coffee comes in heavy mugs that keep the heat just long enough to burn your tongue. I got there first, sat in a corner booth facing the door, ordered coffee black. It tasted like scorched patience. When Emily walked in, she didn't look like someone who had been crying. She looked like someone who had stopped just before she could start. Early 40s. Dark hair pulled back, coat unbuttoned despite the cold. She scanned the room, saw me, and walked over without hesitation. "You're Daniel," she said, sliding into the booth. Her voice was steady. I nodded. "And you're Emily." She put her phone on the table between us. Screen down. "I've suspected for months," she said. "But I thought it was just flirting. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife. Then last week he came home smelling like perfume. Not mine." I didn't interrupt. She leaned forward. "Today I decided to work from home. He left for a client meeting. 20 minutes later she showed up. I recognized her from a Facebook photo. Your wife at some charity event. Her hands were still. Too still. They were inside for almost 2 hours," she continued. "When she left she had that lightness, like she'd just been given something." The waitress came by. Emily ordered tea. Neither of us mentioned food. "I'm not here to compare heartbreak," she said, "but I need to know, how far are you willing to go?" I took a slow sip of coffee, watching the steam curl between us. "Far enough that there's no going back." Her lips tightened, like she was measuring the cost of whatever she'd just stepped into. We talked for over an hour, the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the coffee machine filling the spaces between sentences. She confirmed what I already knew from the licensing board's database, that Ryan's career lived and died on public trust. One formal complaint with evidence could freeze his ability to work in 3 states. Multiple complaints from different sources. That could bury him. When she left she handed me a small envelope. "Photos," she said. "Not great ones, but you can tell it's them." I didn't open it until I got home. 6 prints, all taken from a distance. My wife in her navy coat, Ryan in his fitted jacket, their heads bent close together like conspirators. One shot of them stepping into his truck. I slipped the photos into the winter folder. The stack inside was starting to feel heavy. That night my wife came home late. She didn't smell like grapefruit hotel soap this time. She smelled like his cologne, spicy, faint, and expensive in a way he probably thought made him seem important. "Long day?" I asked. She smiled. "You have no idea." I didn't smile back. I let the silence do the work. In bed she fell asleep fast. I stayed awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the tick of the baseboard heater. Somewhere between midnight and 2, I decided the next step wasn't about confrontation. It was about paperwork. Because I knew something Ryan Mercer didn't. The licensing board's complaint system allows anonymous filings, and I had 2 willing sources now, me and Emily Mercer. But the real twist? I wasn't planning to file them here. The fastest way to ruin a man like him isn't through his home turf. It's through the state where his license history already has a scar. That scar, I'd make it bleed again. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of anger that had cooled into something harder. It was the quiet clarity of knowing exactly where to start cutting. At 6 a.m. I was already at my desk, the house still dark except for the glow of my laptop. The winter folder sat open beside me. On the screen, the licensing board complaint portal for the state of Nevada. That's where his consent order lived. 5 years ago, Ryan Mercer had taken a fine and a formal warning there for failing to disclose a conflict of interest. The board's record was public, but most people didn't dig that far back. I knew regulators hate repeat offenders. One complaint in his home state might get investigated slowly, with backroom favors and quiet phone calls. But a complaint in a state where he'd already been flagged? That could get him suspended before he even knew there was a problem. The form was detailed. Dates, names, descriptions. I didn't rush. I wrote in plain language. I didn't accuse him of sleeping with my wife. That's noise. I accused him of mishandling a refinance file involving a married couple, without full disclosure of his personal relationship with one party. I attached the forged signature from our aborted refinance, the email thread, and one of Emily's photos. When I hit submit, the screen flashed a case number. Anonymous. Filed. Irreversible. I closed the laptop and poured myself coffee. The first sip tasted sharper than usual. At 9, Emily called. "I have something," she said, her voice quick. "He left his work laptop at home this morning. It's unlocked. I can see his emails." That was dangerous. If she dug too deep, he'd know someone had been inside his digital life. And suspicion is poison to a clean revenge. "Emily," I said, "listen to me. Don't open anything that looks personal. Just look for patterns. Clients' names, meeting times, addresses. Screenshot them and send them from a new email account. Then close it. Leave no trace." She hesitated. "You're really calm about this." Calm is a weapon, I thought. Because we're not in a rush. I told her, we're in control. By noon she'd sent me a spreadsheet, her version of organized chaos as she called it. Meeting logs, loan files, The few PDF attachments with last names I recognized from his online reviews. One name caught my attention. Jay Lask. I'd seen it in a news article about a developer accused of bribing zoning officials. That was another thread worth pulling. But Emily made a mistake. In her excitement, she'd also taken screenshots of a text thread between Ryan and my wife. One line from my wife to him stopped me cold. I think he suspects, but he's too proud to confront me. She knew. She'd known for weeks. The words didn't make me angry. They made me certain. This wasn't just betrayal. This was strategy. Hurt. And it told me something important. She believed my silence meant weakness. That was the kind of underestimation you can build an entire war on. At 3 p.m. I made my first public move. I walked into Northway Lending's office lobby. Not to see Ryan. Not to make a scene. I was there for the receptionist. "I'm here to drop off some documents for Mr. Mercer," I said, holding a plain white envelope. Inside a copy of the company's own code of conduct, highlighted on the no fraternization clause, with a post-it note. "Ask your compliance officer if this applies to your regional director." The receptionist didn't know what to do with it. She asked if she should put it in his inbox. I told her to send it directly to compliance. It's time sensitive. Then I left. The point wasn't to get him in trouble today. The point was to plant the seed inside his company. So when the complaint hit from Nevada, they'd already be looking sideways at him. That night, Emily called again. "He's acting jumpy," she said, checking his phone more, stepping outside to take calls. "What's next?" "Next," I said. "We make him trip over his own lies." I explained the plan. Emily would casually mention at home that she'd been contacted by a journalist asking questions about mortgage fraud involving Northway Lending. No details, no accusation. Just a whisper of trouble. People like Ryan don't ignore whispers, they dig. They get sloppy. By the end of the week, he'd emailed my wife. "Don't talk to anyone. Delete old texts. We might have to get our story straight." That was the email I'd been waiting for. It wasn't just unprofessional. It was obstruction. And obstruction, in a regulatory context, is gasoline on a fire. I printed it, added it to Winter. But before I could move to the next step, Emily called in a panic. "He just told me he's flying to Nevada next week for a conference. He's never been to Nevada for work. Do you Yes," I said. "I think he just got the letter from the board. And I also thought something else if he was going to Nevada. He might be trying to clean up his mess before it spread." Which meant I had to make sure the mess got bigger before he landed. Ryan's conference in Nevada wasn't on any industry calendar I could find. That meant one thing. He was heading there to meet someone quietly. Probably a contact in the licensing office. Maybe an old colleague who could smooth over the trouble before it bled into his career. I wasn't going to give him that chance. 2 days before his flight, I sent an anonymous tip, not to the board but to a mortgage industry watchdog blog. I attached no names, just the situation. Regional lending director under investigation for conflict of interest in refinance deal involving spouse of married client. The language was dry, the kind reporters love because they can fill in the blanks with their own digging. Then I called Emily. "He's going to be more on edge than ever," I told her. "Don't push him. Just listen. Anything he says could be useful." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He's already snapping at me for breathing too loud." That night, my wife came into my office with 2 mugs of tea, a gesture she used to reserve for when we were actually close. "You've been working late a lot," she said, setting one down. "Numbers don't sleep," I replied, not looking up. Her tone shifted. "Daniel, is there something going on?" There it was, the fishing line. She wanted me to bite, to reveal what I knew, so she and Ryan could prepare a counterstory. I smiled faintly. "Not that you'd believe." For the first time in weeks I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. She left without touching her tea. The next morning Emily texted me. "He's packing a folder labeled personal. Keeps it in his carry-on." That told me whatever he was taking to Nevada wasn't for the conference that didn't exist. The day of his flight, I parked 2 rows over from his truck at the airport long-term lot. I wasn't there to follow him, too risky. Instead, I took photos of his carry-on as he walked toward the terminal, the folder just visible inside. Why? Because the licensing board loved visual proof of chain of possession for sensitive documents. If he tried to claim he never had them, my photos would say otherwise. 2 hours later, while he was still in the air, I moved on my next play. I mailed a packet overnight to Northway Lending's compliance department. Inside, the printed text from my wife where she admitted I suspected. The forged refinance document. A copy of their own no fraternization clause. My notarized statement. No accusations. Just, this is information I believe you should review in light of ongoing regulatory matters in Nevada. By the time Ryan landed, his company would have it in their hands. Emily called that evening. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "He called me from the hotel, furious. Said someone from corporate asked him about a potential ethics issue. He thinks one of his competitors is trying to smear him. Perfect. Paranoia would make him sloppy." But Emily's next words made my chest tighten. "I think he's starting to suspect me, Daniel. He keeps asking where I've been during the day, who I've talked to. If he finds out—" "He won't," I said quickly, though the truth was more complicated. We were both too deep in this now. The next morning I got an email from the Nevada board. They'd escalated his case from preliminary review to formal investigation. That meant recorded interviews, mandatory document submission, and most importantly a public notice of investigation on their website. The notice went live within hours. By noon, the same mortgage watchdog blog I'd tipped off had updated their headline, "Nevada Licensing Board opens investigation into Regional Director for Ethics Violation." I didn't need to attach his name. The blog found it, and once it was there, every client who Googled him would see it. That evening my wife slammed the front door harder than necessary. "Do you know what you've done?" she demanded. I looked up from my desk. "No, why don't you tell me? Ryan's career is hanging by a thread, and somehow you're in the middle of it." Her eyes were bright with anger, but underneath I saw something else. Fear. I didn't raise my voice. "You should choose your words more carefully. Careers aren't the only things that hang by threads." She froze like I'd just spoken a language she hadn't heard from me before. Then she turned and left. That night, Emily sent me the message that would change everything. "He just booked a meeting with a reporter when he gets back. Says he's going to set the record straight. If Ryan thought he could spin this into a smear campaign against me, he was underestimating how much I'd already stacked against him. But if he went public, it could pull Emily into the open, and maybe even my wife. I needed to make sure the reporter's story was one Ryan couldn't control, which meant I had to get there first. The reporter's name was Ben Whitaker, mid-30s regional business desk, the kind who lived for career-making exposés on corporate misconduct. I didn't know him, but Emily's screenshot of Ryan's travel calendar had his name in the subject line of an email. That was enough. The morning after Emily tipped me off, I called Ben's newsroom. The receptionist sounded bored until I said, "I have documentation on an active mortgage ethics investigation that's about to go public, and I know you have a meeting scheduled with Ryan Mercer." There was a pause. Then it clipped. "One moment." Ben came on the line. His voice was curious but cautious. "Go ahead." "Not giving you everything over the phone," I said. "Meet me at the Iron Horse Cafe in an hour. Corner table. Bring your recorder." He didn't ask my name. Professionals know not to spook the source. At the cafe, I slid the winter folder across the table. "No commentary from me," I told him. "You can verify every date, name, and document. The only thing I ask is that you check the Nevada board site before you run it. The investigation is already public. All you have to do is connect the dots." Ben flipped through the pages. His eyebrows rose at the forged refinance signature, then again at the text thread between Ryan and my wife. "This is thorough," he said. "I'm a thorough man." Before we left, I added one more thing. "Ryan will tell you this is a smear campaign from a jealous husband, but ask him about his 2018 consent order in Nevada. Watch how he reacts." That afternoon, Ryan flew back into town. By evening, Emily texted, "He's pacing. Keeps saying he has to get ahead of the narrative." The next morning, Ben called him for the interview. Emily had her phone on speaker in the next room. She didn't say a word, just let me listen. When Ben asked about the consent order, there was a long silence on Ryan's end. Then the stumble, the kind of verbal misstep that sounds small but explodes in print. "That was handled. It's not relevant." By Friday, the story broke. Front page of the business section. Regional lending director under investigation. Prior ethics violation resurfaces. The article laid out everything. The Nevada investigation, the forged documents, the text messages, the code of conduct breach. They didn't name my wife, but the description of a married client's spouse was enough for people in their circle to connect the dots. By noon, Northway Lending announced Ryan was placed on administrative leave pending review. By the following Tuesday, his photo was gone from their leadership page. Emily called me that night. She didn't sound triumphant. She sounded tired. "It's over," she said. "At least for me." "It's not over," I said. "Not yet. Because I still had one thing left. That weekend I invited my wife's parents over for Sunday dinner. She thought it was a peace offering. She wore the red dress she knew they liked, set the table with the good dishes. Halfway through the meal I excused myself and returned with a thin envelope. I placed it in front of her between the mashed potatoes and the wine glasses. "What's this?" she asked, laughing lightly. "Proof," I said, "of everything you thought I didn't know." She froze. Her father frowned. Her mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply said, "The house is paid off. The accounts are clean. I'll be moving out this week. You can explain the rest to them however you like." Her father looked at me, then at her. "Explain what?" I stood, buttoned my jacket. "Ask her about Ryan Mercer and the investigation that just ended his career." I walked out into the cool evening air, the sound of their voices rising behind me. At the curb I paused. The street was quiet, except for a neighbor's sprinkler ticking in the distance. I felt no rush of victory, no thrill, just the even calm of a man who had balanced the ledger. Some people call it justice. I call it necessary. And that was the last time I saw my wife. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments.